Welcome, everyone. I'm Melissa Harris Perry, and I'm your moderator for about the next hour and a half or so. And again, just another big welcome to everyone who is joining us on this second day of the Vera Institute's Justice event on reimagining prosecution. Now, I want to just get right to it because over the course of the next hour or so, we're going to discuss some Black women prosecutors and discuss with some Black women prosecutors across the country who are seeking to make change in our system of criminal punishment. And as part of that conversation, we're going to surface some of the racist and gendered backlash that these prosecutors are facing. And altogether, both on the panel as well as with all of you, we're going to try to think together about ways to advance justice and to ensure that prosecutors are accountable to their communities, but that they are not subjected to abuse, particularly racialized and gendered abuse. Now, before I introduce the panel, I'm going to pause for a moment because I think it's important for us to acknowledge the moment that we find ourselves in as a nation. Yesterday, the Congressional Select Committee investigating the January 6th attack on the Capitol began its hearings. And I'm sure by now that you will have all heard testimony, or at least parts of the testimony from the four members of law enforcement, including two Capitol Police who were brutally attacked on that day. And those officers described the attack as a white supremacist insurrection and repeatedly used the word terrorism to talk about it. And I want to begin here because I believe in many ways it highlights the challenges we have around roles, around identities, around the state, around notions of justice. What does it mean in this context to think about a police report in a very different way as we think about the experiences that these officers had? And also, how can we even begin to talk about pursuing justice against those who have the least power in our nation, unless it is informed by a clear-eyed capacity to seek justice over and against those who have the most power and to ensure that they are also accountable. And I'm going to take one more point of personal privilege and then I will introduce the panel, because I also want to acknowledge that these issues of criminal punishment and justice reform are personal to me, and I know that they are personal to many of you. I'm the youngest in my family. There are four daughters and a son, and the only brother, who is my big brother, we share the same birthday, but he's 9 years older to the day, is an extraordinary person. He's tall, he's smart, he's good looking. He is an exceptionally proud individual. And as a kid, I definitely looked up to him both literally and figuratively. But for most of his adult life, none of those aspects of who he is have had much to do with his life path. Instead, his addiction to drugs has been the one and only thing that has mattered about what his life opportunities are, because since his early 20s, my big brother has been in the grip of the criminal punishment system. He's been in and out of systems of incarceration, parole, confinement, custody. And for all of you who love people who are currently confined, then you know that the past year and a half in the COVID crisis has been particularly heart-wrenching. At the same time that that's my brother's story, I have a sister who for more than 25 years has been an effective and aggressive public defender in San Francisco, kind of the left flank of Gideon's army. And I will say that growing up with an incarcerated brother and a public defender sister does not make me a big fan of prosecutors. And so I wanted to just kind of give that perspective as a way for us, for a way for me to acknowledge where I am standing personally, so that all of us in this work are able to think about the ways our own positionality impacts our understanding of these issues. So let me introduce our distinguished panel. First, Roy Austin, who is Vice President of Civil Rights and Deputy General Counsel at Facebook. He is also a former federal prosecutor and a former defense attorney. Roy, thank you for being here. Also, Angela Davis, who is Distinguished Professor of Law at American University. Thank you so much, Angela, for everything you've done to get this panel together as well. We are also joined today by Kim Foxx, who is Cook County State's attorney and the first Black woman to hold that role. Kim, it is always lovely to see you. And we're also finally joined by Ray Hartmann, a journalist and founder of the Riverfront Times. So thank you all for being here. So Attorney Foxx, I want to begin with you, and maybe just by getting you to lay out for us, so you are a prosecutor, from your perspective, what is the duty, or what are the duties, what's the role of a prosecutor?
Well, first, thank you for having me, Melissa. It's always an honor to be with the panelists here today, who I've admired throughout my career and have been an incredible source of strength for me. I think first and foremost, it is to seek justice. And I love the description of the recap about Satana's remarks about justice as an art, because it's different in many circumstances. And as a prosecutor leading the second largest prosecutor's office in the country, in a city or a county that includes the city of Chicago, which receives more than its share of negative attention around violence, it is for me the responsibility of being able to determine what's in the interest of public safety and what has been a system that has been perverted to deal with issues that are not issues that are around justice, but around health and economics and equity and fairness, and a system that has just been overly relied upon to deal with all of those concerns. And so for me, it is about using the weight of the state as judiciously as possible in the interest of safety and justice.
So those are big ideas. At the end of any given day or week or year, how do you know if you've been successful? How do you actually measure or sort of take account for your own work in terms of moving towards justice?
Yeah, there's a couple ways that we can slice it, but justice, again, it's personal, right? If you're talking to someone who has been impacted by crime, I talk very openly about having been a survivor myself of sexual abuse and sexual assault. Justice for me personally feels like feeling whole. And I don't know that the system that I work in will ever be in a position to make anybody feel whole. It just, we aren't built and equipped to do that. Is it about accountability? And accountability differs. You know, what I would want is the person who harmed me to not do it to someone else, acknowledge the harm that was caused, and be better for themselves and for their community. The way that we've measured justice as a prosecution, as a profession, had been around convictions. I mean, you know, how many people did we send to prison? How much time did they get? And again, that isn't a true measurement of what justice looks like. In a city like Chicago, I want to be able to every year be able to feel like people feel comfortable in their neighborhoods, that they can sit on their porches and enjoy a glass of lemonade without fear of harm. It feels like that to me. But it also means that I have to be responsible for being transparent, you know, show our work. Because again, justice is the system that's supposed to be here to do right, shouldn't be causing even more harm. And that is looking at our prosecution practices to say, are we prosecuting people who have substance use disorder, knowing that this is not the place to do it, but we have a boatload of convictions related to drug addiction. We have a boatload of convictions related to low-level offenses that are tied to poverty or tied to mental health. If you looked at our conviction rates, what you would see, I would believe, would be an injustice of a system that was designed to do something else. And so for me, the measurement of it is, are we moving towards healthy, safe, thriving communities? And that is demonstrated by people having a sense of that safety in their neighborhoods. But also, are we stopping practices that we know are causing harm? That it's not just like who comes into our system. Me as a system holder, justice is also, am I causing harm in the name of good? And if I am, how do I stop doing that? You're muted.
Sorry about that. I want to move to you, Mr. Austin, to respond a bit to this, because in some ways, I listen to Attorney Foxx and I think, who could be against this, right? Who doesn't want to live in a community that feels a particular kind of way, where people feel whole, where people feel safe, where we are mitigating and reducing harm? And yet, for exactly this sort of definition of prosecutorial positioning, right? That the role is not simply to meet these long-term measures that have stood as the standards. We know that Attorney Foxx and other Black women who are in the role that she serves in other localities have taken a great deal of criticism from both within and outside of the system. So I'm hoping maybe you could help us to understand why Attorney Foxx's definition of justice and the measurements that she's using are so distressing to so many.
Well, thank you so much, Melissa, and feel free to call me Roy, despite all this gray. I'm really much younger than I look.
Oh, it's just because I'm Southern. It wouldn't matter if you were 15, I'd still call you Mr. or Mrs.
All right, well, we'll go ahead with Roy, because I'm Northern, and so I don't even understand the whole Mr. thing. So let me just say, the people who are against it are the people who are threatened by it. I mean, the people who are against it are people who have largely profited in either their employment or their lives by locking up young Black men, mistreating young Black men, locking up young Black women, brown people in general, and they don't like the idea of reform. Our police were founded on the idea of basically capturing slaves. Our law enforcement system, if you look at it, if you look at so much of what it's done over decades and really at some level centuries, has been to take the lives, to dehumanize people who they saw as lesser. And largely that has fallen on the idea of it being a Black and brown people, including our Native American brothers and sisters. So what Kim stands for, and I've had the honor of working with Kim for some years now, and then working with her sisters in this space, Aramis Ayala, Kim Gardner, and a number of others. What I've seen is people who don't want to see them where they are, who in a subtle sense will insult them about their intelligence, insult them about their competence, insult their experience, but then sometimes just come right out and say that racist thing and say that sexist thing, and viciously attack them, hoping that they will leave and that they will run away. And what I found is that when I was representing Aramis, when I was representing Kim Gardner, what I found is the most courageous people that I have ever really worked with. Women who, despite every single day facing horrific personal and professional threats that I have never seen before. DAs are usually held up as some kind of very special and honorable position, and the attacks that I saw could not have been more vicious. And it's coming from people who have in some way profited from a system that has been unfair for decades, if not centuries.
Well, I want you to stick right there and maybe just go one step deeper for us, for folks who may not have been following the news on these. I love how you said Attorney Foxx's sisters in these roles. Just without doing, suffering porn, but give us a sense so that we have a clarity about the kinds of experiences that these district attorneys are experiencing that is quite distinct from what their white male colleagues or even their white female colleagues have experienced.
Yeah, so Aramis Ayala did the insane thing of being honest with the people who elected her, and took a hard look at the death penalty and said that, it just doesn't seem appropriate in the situations that I'm looking at. She faced heat from the inside, her own office trying to undermine her. She faced it from every other prosecutor in Florida. She was the prosecutor in Orlando. Every other prosecutor around her in Florida attacking her. She had the then governor taking her cases and giving them to a white man in a neighboring jurisdiction. She had the court saying they don't even know why she has the position that she has. She had police officers stopping her. She had her local police chief condemning her. And then you take Kim Gardner. Kim Gardner, who again didn't ask for the abuse, simply doing her job, which was at the time prosecuting the then governor for sexually assaulting and sexually humiliating a woman who he was having an affair with. What does she get for that? And despite the fact that his own Republican Party acknowledged that everything that she was saying that he had done, that he had in fact done, she gets assaulted. She gets threatening letters regularly in the mail, the most vicious kinds of threats that just bring out the straight up racism. She gets her case, she gets a case that she's working on taken from her and handed to this white guy who had never, who basically was never a prosecutor. They just handed the case to him to investigate her, to basically burden her office. And I can go on, and you describe it as porn because it's really awful what these women faced. And look, there is a backlash against some of these more progressive prosecutors, but what I saw had race, had gender, had everything as the extra motivating factor on these attacks, with a hope that they would walk away. And what I saw was women who just were strong enough in themselves. They had nothing around them to keep fighting these fights.
Professor Davis, you literally wrote the book about this, both about prosecutorial reform, but then also thinking quite distinctly about these intersectional experiences. But are you surprised by the realities that that Roy is just now describing to us?
No, not surprised at all, although I have to say the vitriolic nature of the attacks on these Black women have just, even me in all the years I've been around for a while, I've never seen anything like it. And I think, Melissa, the thing that makes me want to scream, makes me crazy is, I've been railing about prosecutors for 25 years, about all their power and discretion. And frankly, as a former public defender, I didn't like it. I was like, prosecutors have all this power, they have all this discretion, they're using this power and discretion in ways that have created this horrible criminal legal system that we have, mass incarceration. They make decisions that cause and perpetuate racial disparities. And so I fought it. But the thing about it is the United States Supreme Court has, from time immemorial to in a long series of cases, has repeatedly upheld and affirmed the power and discretion of prosecutors to charge. If they want to charge, they have the power to decide who to charge, who not to charge, to dismiss cases. There's a case in which the Supreme Court says the prosecutor has as long as the prosecutor has probable cause, the decision whether or not to prosecute rests entirely in his discretion. That's from a case called Borden-Kircher versus Hayes. And the power to dismiss a case. And Kim will, State's Attorney Foxx will talk about this, I know. But they have the power to dismiss cases. In a case called Town and Newton versus Rumery, the court said that courts must defer to prosecutorial decisions as to whom to prosecute. And there have been other cases. All these are cases in which prosecutors' power and discretion was challenged. And the Supreme Court repeatedly said no. And even in cases, there are a couple of cases, United States versus Armstrong and McCleskey versus Kemp, where prosecutors made decisions, charging decisions that caused horrible racial disparities. In Armstrong, it was a case out of California where the prosecutor was charging all the Black defendants in federal court where the penalties were harsh, and all the white defendants in state court where the penalties were less harsh. Clearly a racial disparity, and the Supreme Court said, sorry, unless there's a constitutional violation, you can't touch the power and discretion of prosecutors to charge. And they decided that was not a constitutional violation. McCleskey versus Kemp, an infamous case involving the death penalty in Georgia, where there was this study done by Professor Baldus, the Baldus study, a well-known study showing that Black people who were charged with killing white people were 4.3 times more likely to get the death penalty than anybody else. And the Supreme Court said, yeah, that's what's happening. The study is valid, but sorry, you can't touch the discretion of prosecutors, right? And so these were all cases in which the prosecutors were carcerated, were locking up people, were maintaining the status quo. And the Supreme Court said, yeah, prosecutors, you got the power to do it. But all of a sudden, now that there are prosecutors who are using that same power and discretion to try to get rid of this harm that Kim is talking about, to reduce the jail and prison population, to end the racial disparities, now all of a sudden you have courts and you have legislatures and you have law enforcement people, cops, all of a sudden saying, wait, whoa, hold on now. No, we don't like this. So now we're going to challenge that power and discretion. And it's to a lot of the prosecutors who are reform-minded, who are trying to make change, but there is no, the Black women, the attacks against them have been so vitriolic and so clearly racist, misogynistic, and sexist. And I'm not one to, I'm a scholar, I believe in research and evidence. I've never seen anything like this before, because as Roy pointed out, it's not even subtle. Like Kim will tell you about the Proud Boys marching outside her office, right, trying to get her out, and Roy all mentioned the horrible, I've seen some of the threats, the sexist and sexual awful things that we can't even say on this webinar, that came and come every day to Kim Gardner, and on all the hateful things. And I'll stop there, but we can talk about some of the examples, but it's just, that's the thing that's maddening to me. There's so many examples of judges all of a sudden doing the opposite of what the Supreme Court says, which is meddling in the power and discretion of prosecutors. They're only doing it with Black women. And I'll stop there, but I'd love to talk about some of the examples, explicit examples, because there are others. Rachel Rollins in Suffolk, who's had this happen to her. I mean, I think Kim Foxx and Kim, I don't know something about the name Kim, but Kim Foxx and Kim Gardner have gotten it like nobody else. I agree with Roy. I've never, kind of makes me emotional, because I don't know how they do it. Like, they are the bravest people I know. They keep on doing what the people elected them to do, regardless of these awful people. And they deserve our support. I'll stop right there.
Ray, I feel like we've gotten some big picture here. I'm really interested in the role of the media in this process. So we've heard from Professor Davis and from Roy about the ways in which the courts systems themselves and the system of criminal punishment itself is pushing back. I'm wondering also about particularly maybe local media, and how local media and state-based media are covering these prosecutors in ways that might reflect some of these precisely these same biases. So maybe if you want to take the case of Kim Gardner in particular, because of the St. Louis context.
The media is broken. I mean, nationally,
well, yeah.
Nationally, half of it's like orbiting Jupiter, and the half that's actually sane is as big a part of the problem as it is really more part of the problem than the solution. Even liberal newspapers that like the idea of reform prosecutors don't actually enjoy the work of reform prosecutors. I've been doing this, and I with all respect to young Mr. Austin and Professor Davis, you both actually understated the problem with Kim Gardner. I mean, the white legal establishment in St. Louis, which is also known as the legal establishment, is trying to get her law license as we speak. I mean, they're not just, it's bad enough, and you've well stated the personal threats and the courage she's had in enduring them. I've been doing this about a half century, and I've never seen anything like it's beyond a double standard that Kim Gardner has to endure. And it's really pathetic. And you have to understand that the media there's parts of this that is the nature of the media. I mean, nobody got shot downtown is not a news story. So if a reform prosecutor causes 1,000 unjustly incarcerated young Black men to get out, and 999 of them have a law-abiding life ahead of them. It's the thousandth that's good. That's just the nature of media, irrespective of race, gender, anything else. So you've got that. But you also got the fact that she's a disruptor, as is Kim Foxx. Kim Gardner ran as a disruptor. And I think as Roy alluded to, the disruptees aren't happy about it. They do not wish to be disrupted. And you have to understand, and I don't think people realize it, when you're talking about the white legal establishment, they have provided information, sources, and support to the white news media for decades. So these are people with relationships with the news people. And you should not think, do not think of the media as an honest broker here. They are part of the system that's being disrupted, even if their editorial pages are down with reform prosecution. You're not going to get, you're not likely to get positive coverage just by the nature of the beast.
I mean, I'll go back just to maybe dig in on this a bit. So particularly maybe if we're talking about print coverage, right? So newspapers, I'm thinking about where we began this panel with the idea of the police report and the way that reporters typically report a police report as though it is verified fact.
Well, they do a lot of times. And again, if a reporter or a newspaper have built alliances over the years with, say, police sources, they're naturally going to be biased toward them, whether they want to be or not. And in St. Louis, if you're biased toward the police, see you later. I mean, I don't know what phrase you'd like. Shall we say racially challenged? I mean, Kim Gardner uniquely is in a situation where there have been decades of such just outright racism throughout it's almost beyond systemic racism. And trying to disrupt that is going to, and it isn't to suggest that she can't make mistakes, because all people do. But if she makes any mistake, it's magnified like I've never seen. I mean, she could change her order in the drive-thru at Starbucks and it would be on the front page. I mean, it's really something. And I'm not saying it to patronize anybody. I've written about it a lot. I had a chance to interview Bennett Gershman, who's a well-known, who's written his own books on the Brady Law and so forth out of Pace University. He says, and he's got some credibility, unlike me, he says he's never seen anything like what's happened to Kim Gardner. And he's, like I say, he's one of the leading attorneys in the country, I believe, on the subject of prosecutorial abuse and so forth. And she's being subjected to a really unfair double standard. And really, just one other point to follow up on Roy Austin. Eric Greitens, the disgraced former governor who's now running for Senate in Missouri, he had a sex scandal that preceded anything Kim Gardner did. It was sent, the husband at the time of the victim played a tape of her crying to him about it on the local TV station. It was a big story before Kim Gardner decided to get involved. The Republicans in the state legislature hated Eric Greitens because he had bullied them for a couple of years, because he himself had run as a Republican disruptor, and they took him out. I mean, Kim Gardner couldn't claim that if she wanted to. The Republicans are the reason Eric Greitens left, as he should. And Kim Gardner really had nothing, what's happened is because he's using the fact that she's a George Soros funded prosecutor, as a campaign talking point, that's the only reason that case is still alive. And because they're trying to go after her and her investigator. And it's really been a really sad chapter in St. Louis's legal history.
Attorney Foxx, I'm coming back to you because I appreciate the kind of narratives about strength that we've been hearing, but I reject strong Black womanism and capes and pedestals. And although I certainly believe in Black girl magic, I don't see it as a requirement in order to be a human. And so to the extent that you are willing, I'd like to hear a bit about your lived experience of this backlash. It's one thing, you know, I'm kind of laughing to keep from crying about some of this, but also I think, and this is really the core question, why in the world keep doing it? I mean, you have a lot of marketable skills and there's a lot of jobs you could do. And maybe some of them would even help to pursue justice in some important ways that would not put you in the line of this kind of racist and sexist fire all day and every day.
It's not that I haven't thought about it or don't think about it maybe once or twice a day. It's exhausting. It's funny you talk about the context setting of yesterday and, you know, the hearings in DC. I was thinking about Simone Biles. And I was thinking about the weight and the pressure.
Oh, I was coming there next.
Yeah, I've been consumed with Simone Biles and Naomi Osaka and Serena. And not that we are athletes, but you know, the weight that we put of our expectations on them in professions, in fields that historically, you know, Black women hadn't been, right? We take for granted in our generation that we grew up with Venus and Serena, but we have to remember that they were these Black women who, you know, for years, you know, after Althea Gibson, we hadn't seen them and dominated. And with it came the vitriol. The same thing with Simone, and I think of Gabby Douglas and the comments about her hair years ago. And it's exhausting. And so to hear these women today own and acknowledge the toll that it takes publicly, because, you know, to Roy's point, my sisters and I, we have conversations all the time. All of us are mothers. All of us have daughters. And there is the work that you steel yourself to do. But as Professor Davis alluded to, I had racists march on my office. The Proud Boys, members of QAnon, and the Fraternal Order of Police all gathered together and marched on my office because they didn't like that I dropped charges on a celebrity for what would otherwise in any other place be a misdemeanor. And, you know, to the point about the media, what was amazing about that was this happened where people literally were taking my photo and rubbing my picture on their genitalia outside of the chief prosecutor's office in the city of Chicago, and the press didn't talk about them. They didn't talk about it. It took a month before the Chicago Sun-Times ran a story about white nationalists coming down to my office. And to me, it wasn't about policy. It wasn't about this one particular case or misdemeanor. It was that I made the choice, that I made the decision as a Black woman about the fate of a Black man who had made allegations about MAGA, and that was unacceptable. And lost in there, I was having to defend policy, and nowhere in the conversation was the attacks on me as a Black woman. The racialized, it had gotten so bad that we had a receptionist who had to be reassigned because she couldn't handle the phone calls, the nature of the phone calls. And so it's incredibly exhausting. I think the way that we've gotten through it is the space to be vulnerable. And I think all of us have been even more publicly vulnerable about what this is, because we don't want to, I think it lets those who try to oppress you off the hook when you are, you know, I can handle it. It lessens the responsibility of looking at those who would do this. And it is why now when people come for me, I remind, you know, them what the FOP, the Fraternal Order of Police, did. They marched on my office with members of the Proud Boys and 3 other white nationalist groups. And they can say that we disavow that, but I say, what is it about your organization that they feel that they can find comfort in your company? And what is it about my presence that unifies these groups together? And so I think all the time, why I stay or have stayed is more than just being, you know, a Black woman. I'm from the projects of Chicago. I'm from Cabrini. I have the same experiences of having people who have been incarcerated for things that I know that other people wouldn't be incarcerated for. I've seen how this system has chewed up and spit out not just Blacks, but poor Blacks. And I have had the ability in this role to reverse some of that. And there is centuries of work that we are trying to undo. But I shudder to think, for all of the vitriol and the things that have come, just from like, that was 3 years into my term. What is it that they're trying to stop me from doing? And so whether that's vacating the wrongful convictions of 100 people who were falsely prosecuted by a corrupt police officer, or charging police officers with crimes, or not charging people for possessing drugs or doing simple retail thefts in a city that is reeling in blood from gun violence, but we spend more of our time going after nonviolent offenders. If I left, I worry that the pendulum would switch back. And then the last thing I will say about this, the media, I'm so glad that we have that piece on here, because it is astounding to me to watch the media coverage of myself and the others that we talked about. Because if I looked at the history, I used to be a line assistant in my office. You know, I've lived in Cook County my whole life. You would have thought that I was the first like state's attorney in Cook County. The amount of attention that this office gets, the amount of, and we were wrongfully convicting people by the hundreds. We had a police commander who was literally torturing Black and brown men. We had a legacy. We were called the false confession capital of the United States. All of that under a watchful eye of a media who didn't have the same level of scrutiny. I wish to God that we had the level of scrutiny that came to me because of an actor on TV than we had on the men who were tortured by Commander Burge, because maybe we would not have paid almost $1 billion in wrongful conviction lawsuits, police misconduct, and maybe these men and women who had their lives stolen from them would have had a better outcome if they'd have given the amount of attention that they give to me and Kim and Aramis than they did when others had this role, particularly white men had this role, and condoned a system that was abusive and oppressive and without scrutiny.
Listen, just true. Yes. Amen. All of that. And I want to dig more into the media piece, but I want to go back to one other piece first. And where I'm going to come to you on it, but it's something that Attorney Foxx just gave us, and it's connecting back with the question as well. So Jeffrey, I see your question about the Fraternal Order of Police. I'm going to hijack your question a little bit, and I'm going to connect it with something that Attorney Foxx just said. So Roy, when we have the Fraternal Order of Police marching with the Proud Boys and other white nationalist organizations. So I want to push a little bit on you here. So when I think about the report on 21st century policing that came out of the Obama White House, a very important kind of, moving of the public discourse in some critical ways. But in that moment, let's call it 10 years ago, it's not quite that long ago, we're still primarily in our discourse about policing and about prosecution, talking about implicit racism, talking about this idea that, yes, there may be these biases in the system, but not because anyone is biased. The system is simply reproducing it, racism without racists. But my goodness, in the past 4 to 5 to 6 years, it certainly feels like we got to move past implicit bias towards talking about whether or not the Fraternal Order of Police marching with white nationalist organizations is indicative of something happening in this criminal punishment system that is not just systemic, but quite purposeful. And I'm wondering how our government reporting on it, our definition of the problem we're facing, has kept up with these realities.
Thank you for your question. And Kim Foxx impresses me every time I have a chance to work with her, to speak with her, just what she continues to do is amazing. Look, let's start again where police started, is they were slave patrols. And we can talk about implicit bias all the time, and it's a nice way to have the conversation. But yes, sometimes we need to talk about the straight up racism of it all. I mean, look at the hearings that we just had yesterday. The number of Black police officers that were called the N-word. Let's not forget there were police officers in that insurrectionist mob. Let's not forget that there were police officers who were supporting that insurrectionist mob. I don't know if the people here who are listening remember the Plain View Project's work, where they looked at the social media postings of police officers in 6 departments. The most vicious, racist, sexist, xenophobic, misogynistic language that one could ever expect. And these are the people who are out there policing in areas that are primarily Black and brown. They should not have a job if they're going to be doing and saying and feeling those things, which are not implicit, they are explicit bias. The letters again that Kim Gardner is receiving. The one thing, and one of the commentators, one of the listeners actually pointed this out. Do you realize that they sent the police in to take every single file from Kim Gardner's office? Not just some, every single file. And when Ray was speaking, it reminded me it's not only the media that's in on this, but the courts were appointed in St. Louis by the very same people who are trying to take power away from Kim Gardner. And so they have an obligation almost to support these people on the outside, the very powerful people in St. Louis who are trying to attack, who are attacking Kim Gardner. You know, we talk about implicit bias because, yeah, sorry, let me go back to St. Louis for a second. With respect to the police unions in St. Louis, there's something called the Ethical Association, ESOP, I think it is, Ethical Society of Policing. Those are your Black police officers because the white police union was so racist that they had to create their own. They had to create their own. It is, you know, and some people have problems just saying the truth here, and that is that there is white supremacy and racism in our policing. And we have to get rid of it. Now, look, there are officers who are simply working in a system where it is implicit. The bias is implicit, and we have to deal with that as well. But we can't even deal with the explicit stuff.
Do we need to fundamentally reform the way that the Fraternal Order of Police operates in order to be able to address that?
The police unions have gotten away with silliness. I mean, the idea that a police officer should not give a statement on seeing an act of violence by a fellow police officer for 24 hours, 48 hours, sometimes I think in Louisiana, it's a week, is utter silliness. These are people trained to be witnesses. Okay, if you witness a crime, Melissa, and a police officer comes to you, I just dare you to say to them, hey, could you give me 24 hours just so I get my head straight and I can call my friends to make sure I get my story straight? I mean, the utter silliness that something like that passes tells you about the power that they have. You can't even conduct an investigation. Police chiefs, when I was working on consent decrees, we had police chiefs that welcomed us because of the fact that we could ensure that when they fired a police officer, that they had the power to actually keep that firing in place, because the police unions have so much power. They look at police officers doing bad things and they don't have the gumption to say, you know what, that person doesn't actually deserve to be a police officer. If we look at, I mean, the Chicago Police Union, they get up there on TV and act the fool. New York police act the fool. I mean, you see the St. Louis, the head of the St. Louis Police Union, the things that he has written and said and gets away with it, and police officers follow him, explicitly racist, explicitly sexist. I mean, it is unbelievable. Now, look, I'm a proud progressive. I'm a union person. Yeah, I believe in unions. But
right, that was my main thought. Was like,
unions.
if only like SEIU had the same power.
Oh, yeah, I mean, we've given it away to police where it goes beyond just, making sure that the work conditions are safe and that their salaries are fair, into this power that everyone is afraid to get in front of, and they are allowed to basically get away with anything.
So, Professor Davis, I want to come to you because that language of power now has emerged repeatedly. And Jim, I'm pulling from your question here a bit as I ask this one. So not all of us live in a community where our DA is a Kim Foxx. And this is maybe a bit of an unfair question, but I'm going to frame it in an unfair way so you can tease it out for me. Should we be, if we want justice, if we want to move towards this justice framework that Attorney Foxx gave us initially, should we be for or against strong prosecutorial power and discretion?
Yeah, that's a hard one. And I'm going to answer it. I'm not going to avoid it. But before I do that, I wanted to piggyback on something that both State's Attorney Foxx and Roy said. Back to State's Attorney Foxx, those explicitly racist things with the Proud Boys and all that, I want to talk about the courts because they don't get a pass. So no, the courts, the judge in Cook County didn't say, Black N-word, blah, blah, blah. But what he did was he appointed a special prosecutor to investigate Kim Foxx's decision to dismiss the case against Justice Smollett. My head almost exploded when I found about that, right? Because remember all those cases that I was citing before where you said, you can't, the Supreme Court has repeatedly said, they get to decide who to charge, who not to charge. You can't touch it, but that judge decided, nope, this one right here, I'm gonna do it. And what's crazy about it is that prosecutors every day, all day, right now as we speak, there are millions of prosecutors dismissing cases against people all the time. And they don't do it for the good, right, just reasons that Kim Foxx did it. By the way, what she did was totally consistent with what she pledged to do when she ran for office, which is dismiss cases and nonviolent offenses and focus on violent offenses. That's what the people elected her to do. And all of a sudden, we got to investigate this. A dismissal? Are you insane? It made my head explode. By the way, I think it was in violation of Illinois special prosecutor statute. And I won't dig deep into that because that'll be boring to the audience, but it was in violation. But what she did, because she's a public servant, she's like, fine, investigate me because I know I didn't do anything wrong.
Let me just say, Professor Davis, that isn't going to be boring to anybody. And if you do want to pause it enough to kind of go into it a bit, I actually do think, just kind of looking at the kinds of questions that are emerging, that actually understanding the ways in which that decision is in fact also not just like bad or like we feel bad about it, but is a legal violation, I think is extremely valuable.
I think thank you. It was against the United States Supreme Court jurisprudence, and it was against Illinois state law, in my personal opinion, right? Because that statute has very specific incidents in which you can investigate or appoint a special prosecutor to investigate someone or a prosecutor. They have to have done like allegations of all kinds of horrible things. Dismissing a case? That's insane that she would be. And then we have the National District Attorneys Association, right? Who is always talking about, we are district attorneys and we have all this power and nobody should be able to challenge it. And they all of them like, no one can challenge our power, but they had the nerve to put out a statement against Kim Foxx, against her decision to dismiss the case. Again, almost made my head explode to see that. So I don't want to give the courts a pass because that's what they did. And by the way, she went through this investigation over a year, and of course they found nothing because nothing was there. Talk about a waste of the taxpayers' money and putting her through that for nothing. So that was just absolute insanity. And also just a point about what Roy was talking about in terms of the racist FOP. In St. Louis, before Kim Gardner was elected, as he's pointed out, they had this Facebook page where they were putting explicitly racist things. I'll have a quote from one of their Facebook posts suggested that African Americans moved to another country to pay their own welfare, was what was posted. Another post, Black lives splatter because blue lives matter. I mean, these are threats. And Kim Gardner was explicitly threatened by the head of the FOP on a radio show where he says she's gonna go by force or by choice. That's a threat. That's a crime last I looked. They threatened her, much less protect her. So anyway, I just wanted to point those things out and then get back to your question. Do we want to take, I think your question was, do we want to have prosecutors to have power or do we not want them?
Right. If I care about justice, if I'm, if I'm walking around the world caring about justice, am I for strong prosecutors with lots of discretion? Or am I saying, actually, I want to limit prosecutorial power?
That's a really hard question I've been struggling with for 30 years, Melissa, in all of my writings, right? And I'm going to say something that's totally intellectually dishonest, which is, it depends on who the prosecutor is, which is, of course, not a good answer. But that is what comes down to for me, because for 25 years, I have been writing and railing against prosecutors and how horrible they are and everything. And now I'm at the point of saying, but if we elect good ones, and by good ones, I mean ones that understand what justice is, as Kim was talking about at the beginning, right? That know what it means to do justice, right? The Supreme Court also says that, like, it's in a case called Berger versus United States, where the Supreme Court said, it is not the role of, I'm paraphrasing slightly, it's not the role of a prosecutor to seek convictions, but to seek justice. And seeking justice, yes, sometimes means you got to lock up some people, but seeking justice also means dismissing cases when they need to be dismissed, right? And the prosecutor represents, not, people talk about, prosecutors don't represent the victim, they represent the community. And the community includes the victim of a particular crime. It includes the rest of us in the community who want to be safe, and it also includes the defendant. Right. And so it's a hard job because they have to do this balance of what does justice mean in this particular case. So I guess, and I'm actually working on a law review article now that's the first part of it is defund the prosecution, ? And then colon, I don't know what's coming after that, but it's actually exploring the very question you just asked me, Melissa. I haven't got very far because I'm struggling, right? Do we want to take away some of that power? And you have in some of these elections, like the Manhattan DA race that just came along, right? You have a lot of community groups that were interviewing the candidates. There were a lot of candidates running as so-called progressive prosecutors. And one of the questions that was asked, are you willing to give up X amount of millions of dollars of your budget, right? And give it to the community? Are you willing to I think the question was like, are you willing to cut your budget in half, right? To basically defund your office. And some of them said yes, and some of them said no, because I need that funding to then create the kinds of programming and the kinds of initiatives that's going to reduce the prison population. So I know I haven't answered your question. I think I've explicated how complicated it is, and I think for me, it comes down to democracy, which is, feeling shaky these days, but still exists. And that is, we got to pay attention to these DA races, and we have to get people in those positions like Kim Foxx, like Kim Gardner, despite all the hate. And I will say democracy might be shaky, but it's working a little bit, because despite all the things you've heard that happened to Kim Foxx and that happened to Kim Gardner, guess what? They got reelected. The people said, we like that and we want some more of that. And so they both were overwhelmingly reelected despite all of the hatred. So the people still have a voice. And that's what I think people have to kind of remember. They have to be involved, and not just every 4 years, but during the terms of these district attorneys. And they're gonna do some things that they're not perfect. Even the Black women prosecutors, some of them have done some things that I thought, not you, Kim, but some of them have done some things I thought, come on, sister, now that's not, But, so we need to call them when they're doing something they shouldn't be doing. But when they are out there doing the right thing, and by and large, all of them are absolutely doing that, you need to support them when they're facing these attacks.
So I so appreciate you acknowledging the complexity, the difficulty of it, right? And in some ways, and also Professor Davis for landing on democracy, which is itself, right, a challenging answer to that question, right? So I really like the people in theory, but like when you talk to the actual people, you'd be like, oh Lord, are y'all like in charge like of the whole country? Wow, right? So I think, you know, everybody likes free speech if it's their speech, right?
Right.
But we like it much less when it's the speech of others. So these are, and I don't say that because I know the answer, it's because I don't, right? Because in fact, these fundamental challenges of how we're going to govern ourselves, where we're going to invest power, and how we're going to check that power, I think is foundational, right, to the very long process, right? Far more than any one term or even one lifetime of seeking justice. Ray, I want to come to you, and then we're going to open up to what I'm going to call a speed round. But Ray, I want to come to you because there's at least 3 or 4 questions at this point already around media, and so maybe you and I can play a little game of it sucks so bad, can it get fixed? But there are some questions here about. So there's one attendee who's asked us about whether or not news editors and media owners can be sort of pressed to make changes. Sort of, is it about training? Is it about building different and better kinds of relationships? We have some folks who are asking how viewers and readers and consumers of media might be able to shift what the incentives are. So I'd love to talk just around the media piece a little bit, because it's both a matter of this moment relative to our DA's Kim, but also about sort of the broader question of how media, in the broadest sense, is addressing these questions of justice and criminal punishment reform.
Well, if I can channel a little what Professor Davis was just saying, it depends on who you're talking about. It's not all media are the same, or not all, every city's different. I would say this, one thing I wanted to point out was I sort of said earlier, if you're a reformed prosecutor, especially a reformed prosecutor of color, the media is, with very rare exceptions, the media is not your friend, but it's really clear that the FOP is your enemy. And we saw that nationally. I mean, I don't know if you saw yesterday, the FOP refuses to support the Capitol rioters, and to the point where they wouldn't even condemn active duty officers who went to the riot, who participated in the riot, and they refused to help. They even refused to stand up for the idea of giving medals. There were 21 Republicans that voted against giving these courageous men and women medals at the Capitol, and the FOP, of all things, wouldn't even take a position on it. So we got a real problem there. But as far as the media, it really depends on, I think, the overall understanding that has to be there is that, as I said, the white legal establishment is generally going to be opposed to a reformed prosecutor disrupting it. And it's helpful to think of the media as sort of part of that establishment, sort of a tangent to it. And again, there's exceptions. There are good columnists. It doesn't, if you just circle the wagons and hate the media, that usually doesn't work out well for a public official in any context. It just doesn't. And again, the media in Chicago and the media in St. Louis and the media in Cheyenne, are going to be different, all over the place. You can't generalize. Overall, it depends on who you're dealing with. But if you're dealing with owners of media who are white people, who, like a whole lot of white people, are afraid of Black people and accept tropes and generalities about them, then you got a lot of work to do. It depends on the circumstance. I think the best thing one can do is to try to find people within that hierarchy of the media. There are some things about the media that you should know that are fairly new. One of them is they're dramatically understaffed because most dailies are in great financial trouble. So you've got that. You've got TV reporters who are basically, if you want their attention, you got to start a fire out in front of your office. I mean, they don't have any substance usually. So again, with some exceptions. So it's really a matter of building relationships and understanding what you're dealing with, like in any other situation. I think it's a mistake to, to just view the media as a monolith. They're going to be different people in each situation, but don't lose track of the demographics of those folks, and don't assume they're honest brokers, because again, they have relationships with those legal establishments. I call it the white legal establishment, which is sort of the Department of Redundancy department, but and that's what Kim Gardner's up against, and I'm sure Kim Foxx in Chicago. You're going to deal with that, and I'm sure Kim Foxx, perhaps. I'm guessing there are differences in how the different dailies and the different media treat your situation, and I don't think it's helpful to just circle the wagons again and paint them all with the same brush, because they do end up being important in terms of getting a message out.
So I want to also add just a few things to that, right? So yes, and let me add a few things just for, again, for some of the viewers who are asking some questions about sort of, well, what can we do about it? And how can we be the most sort of responsible consumers of media? So to go to Ray's point about there being different kinds of folks, it's both that there are different kinds of people, and hopefully this will also resonate with Attorney Foxx and with our other panelists, with Roy and with Professor Davis, that one way to start thinking about these questions is to think about the incentive structures that face any person or group of people who are producing something for you. So whether they're producing your criminal justice or whether they're producing your nightly news, what are the incentives that they're facing? What are the structures? What are the things that they are rewarded for, and what is it that they need to do their job? Because it's probably best to assume most people, most of the time, aren't that courageous, right? So every once in a while, you're going to run into a Kim Foxx and a Kim Gardner, but most people have some sets of things they need in order to do their job, and some sets of things that are rewarded and punished. So we broke media in some very simple ways in the US, some of which could be repaired by going back, but mostly would need to be repaired going forward. So just three quick things. One, if you get your media source, you primarily get your information from media that has a profit motivation. And I don't mean just like a circulation, but like if your news is brought to you by the same people who bring you, say, Mickey Mouse, and or Universal Studios, then what you have to know is that if your news is brought to you by the people who bring you, if they also have Orlando, Florida, like gaming events, then they're profit driven, and profit isn't all bad. It'll get you the best widget around, but it will also get you news that, again, if it bleeds, it leads, and if it fits with very particular storylines. And so there's going to be all kinds of things you're just never going to hear when you're with very profit driven media. So try to get as much of your news as you can as a consumer from nonprofit sources, right? From sources where the stories that they bring you aren't the thing that determine how much money is in their system. The second thing I'll say is the end of local newspapers is actually a bad thing. And despite like the ways in which the Chicago press has been horrifying at times to Attorney Foxx, and that the St. Louis press has been and continues to be. An awful lot of what you just heard from Ray is that idea that, again, local press is very, very strapped for time, money, resources. They don't go out and find stories because they're not resourced to do so. And so we want to think about how we can provide for actual reporting. Like, it's not just everybody's opinion about what's happening. It's also about the time, the energy to go and do that reporting. Attorney Foxx said something I think is critical, which is, what if there was time and attention spent on the years of torture, right, meted out by Chicago police? Why did Attorney Foxx make all the front pages? Because it was Hollywood. And you know what that does? It sells papers, it gets clicks. Like, that kid was clickbait number one. And so justice became less relevant. And you don't have to be, you might be bad and racist and terrible, but you don't have to be. You could also just be trying to meet your incentive, right? So the same way as Attorney Foxx was saying, how many arrests, how many convictions, how many clicks, how many eyeballs? So let's really think about the incentives that we have facing our systems. All right, now we're going here into a little bit of a speed round. So I'm going to throw out so if all the panelists want to unmute, I'm just going to throw out a few things out here, and then feel free to jump, and whoever jumps first gets to go on it. So the first thing I'd like to ask for all of you is, give me a city, a state, or a prosecutor that all of us should really be watching, keeping our eyes and attention on over the next year or so as an example of the issues that we've discussed today, whether in a good or a bad way. What should we be looking at? Since again, we don't have local press to always tell us.
I'll jump first on that one. There's a lot, but you asked for one. So I'm going to give one good one and one bad one. So the prosecutor that I think we should be watching over the next year is one who is not yet the prosecutor, but will be in November, God willing. He won the primary. His name is Alvin Bragg, and he's going to be, and I'm going to claim this for him, the district attorney for Manhattan. And that's going to be really important for a number of reasons in the national space, because I think you know who that Manhattan office has been investigating, and Alvin Bragg, an African-American, the first African-American, by the way, district attorney of Manhattan and a son of Harlem, who is amazing and has ran on a platform similar to the one that Kim Foxx ran on. So I think watch him. On the bad side, Shelby County, i.e. Memphis, Tennessee, has now one of the worst district attorneys in the country. Her name is Amy Wyrick. Unfortunately, believe it or not, in Shelby County, the terms for district attorneys it's 8 years. I've never heard of this. 8 years. She's been there 8 years. She's engaged in all kinds of prosecutorial misconduct. Emily Bazelon wrote about her in the book Charged. I recommend that. She's got to go. And so hopefully somebody will challenge her, because she's the worst.
Well, I thought this could be an easy answer. I was going to say, keep your eye on Kim Foxx in Chicago. I mean,
that's needless to say.
That's obvious, dog.
That's obvious.
I'll throw it another way. I'll say one that just because I have the dubious distinction of representing St. Louis here. We used to crave national attention. Apparently we're getting it. Wesley Bell in St. Louis, who's in St. Louis County, is it's an interesting contrast, and we don't try to get into it, how he's covered versus Kim. And there's a lot of reasons for that probably, but he's somebody to watch as a really rising star among prosecutors. And I know that I'm biased because I'm in St. Louis, and I have a high regard for both of them, obviously. But and I would say I'm not as well informed as all you about local prosecutors. I would say it's a tie for attorneys general who are Republicans exploiting these issues nationally, whether it's the guy who's been indicted for 5 years in Texas, Paxton, or Eric Schmidt in Missouri. Right now, the Missouri Senate race, they're all, Kim Gardner hasn't entered that race. It's not running, but they're running against her. They're all exploiting it with this clown, Mark McCoskey, who she also prosecuted, another we have time for. He's in that race. Greitens is in that race. I mean, Schmidt is technically not a criminal. It's running, but I mean, they're all going after Kim. So I think the attorneys general on the state level is really my answer to that.
I would say Rachel Rollins. I'm sorry.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was going to say Rachel Rollins, who is the district attorney out of Boston, and is unapologetic in her approach to reform. Stop prosecuting a number of offenses, studied her policies on misdemeanors and not prosecuting, and found great outcomes. Who was just nominated to the U.S. Attorney's seat for the state of Massachusetts. They've never had a Black woman U.S. attorney there, and it is. What does this elevation of that work from the state to the federal level under this administration with this DOJ, with Rachel at the helm, I think is going to be incredibly exciting to see. And so I would say she's absolutely someone to watch. And I would also say in California, the recall elections or the campaigns against Chesa Boudin and George Gascon, Chesa, who's only been in office for 18 months, and George, who hasn't been in yet 8 months, and the intense backlash that they've received and the efforts to throw them out, and largely because, to the point that was made earlier, this notion that they're Soros funded and that they are responsible for madness and mayhem everywhere. But I think it is the playbook that those who want to maintain the status quo are examining and investing in quite heavily, that we need to be aware
They stole my answer, but
I'm
I
sorry.
you know, Kim, I can't believe you stole my answer.
I'm watching
But I
more.
just want to throw in on the worst ones. Just, I
Yeah.
want to
Oh, for
emphasize
sure.
what Ray just said. The Republican attorneys general talk about a field of largely really the hypocrisy. Let me talk about that. With respect to Michael Flynn, where there's a question as to whether or not a prosecutor should have discretion with respect to Michael Flynn, they all jumped up and down and said, oh, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. And in their own districts, when Black women and other reform-minded prosecutors were trying to exercise their discretion, they're like, oh, no, they can't have discretion. It was just the just blatant hypocrisy that I saw there was something that was stunning. I shouldn't be stunned at all. And then with respect to St. Louis, I mean, you have Kim Gardner's attempt to free a Black man who was wrongfully convicted, and how Eric Schmidt has stepped into that and said she has no authority to do that. That is one of the most horrific and painful things that not a single person has said that this man is guilty of the crime. That's not the argument at all. The sole argument is whether or not Kim Gardner should have the authority to do that. Every other prosecutor who is not named Kim Gardner would have the authority to do that. And it is stunning to me that that is being allowed to happen, and that there's not, talk about a lack of courage. Everyone who is fighting Kim Gardner's attempt to free an innocent man is showing an incredible lack of courage.
The one other name I'll add is just coming from the comments, but I think it came just to the panelists, so I want to be sure everyone knows it, and that's DA Jason Williams out of New Orleans, in the Orleans Parish, the new DA there. So I just wanted to surface that name for everyone. Okay. Now, this is also coming from the questions, but we're doing it as part of our speed round. How do we open the black box of prosecutorial decision-making? How do we make it more transparent for folks? So because we're in speed round, give me, knowing that this may not solve all of it, but give me one, maybe two things that we can do to make it clearer how it is that Attorney Foxx makes her decision, or that any prosecutor makes their decisions.
I'll go first. You just do it. We were the first prosecutor's office in the country to put every piece of felony case level data on an open data portal, from what cases came in, who we charged, who we didn't charge, and what happened all the way through. And we have it broken down by zip code, racial demographics, the like. We got a lot of pushback initially because prosecutors' offices are black boxes. But in order for us to deal with what we knew would be inequity, we had to be able to show it. And so while we were the first, we've seen other jurisdictions do it. And we like the fact that it's unfiltered. You know, we allow people the ability to find the information themselves so that it's not us cultivating the numbers. But there's nothing preventing a prosecutor from being able to put that information to the public. It is public information. And I think we have a responsibility to do it. So there's no magic to it. You just do it.
Can I just jump in and say, people don't understand like how revolutionary that was. And let me just repeat what she said. She was the first prosecutor in the whole country to do that. And it was major because no one had ever done it before. And that's the model that everybody needs to follow.
I would add, just tell from the media standpoint again, when you have success stories, tell them proactively to people that are who in the media particularly, or in other forums, who are willing to listen. Don't assume that they're going to get covered fairly, passively. You've got to, when you have a great success story like that, you pick someone who's rational and open-minded in the media. And while I don't think the average reporter does not care about the commercial side, they do care about getting the story first and competing in that regard. And if you've got a story to tell it proactively to the right person.
Let me take just a quick moment to say thank you to Ray, by the way. Being in St. Louis as a guest, I really appreciated his paper, his publications work on the Kim Gardner matter. There was also the St. Louis American, a black paper that did some phenomenal and honest work there. It is important that you get those. And we had on the other side, you know, we get a gag order, but this one paper in St. Louis, the biggest paper in St. Louis, somehow always knew about the hearings and always was the first to write about them and always wrote about them anti-Kim, which who knows how that happened. But I would say bail reform is the place where I would go. everybody needs to get rid of bail. Bail is the stupidest thing in the criminal justice system. The idea that people can pay their way out or should be forced to pay their way out. If you're so dangerous that you should stay in, then make that determination. Washington, D.C. hasn't had bail in I don't know how long, Angela, but it's been a long time. There's no other place that needs it.
20, 30 years.
Yeah,
Well,
there's no other
Illinois
place that
just
needs it.
passed it. We just signed the legislation. 2023, Illinois has eliminated cash bail. And again, our office pushed for that. And again, the power of the prosecutor, discretion aside, to be able to take the weight of the prosecutor's office to say that this is a fail, along with advocates and activists who've been working on this for years. And we finally eliminated cash bail here in Illinois starting in 2023.
And I got to shout her out again, because before that legislation was even passed during her first term, she used her power and discretion to get hundreds of people released that shouldn't have been there, working with the public defender, even before the law was passed.
Okay, next speed round question also is emerging from our Q&A, but I'm going to reframe it just a bit. And so I'm going to call this the Garland Merritt question, which is to say, if a progressive prosecutor comes into a position and their predecessors have done harm, should they, A, move forward, B, first look back and address what happened prior? Go for it.
It has to be B. It has to be B. Because, I mean, we have this whole thing, procedural justice. And it's the idea that people recognize that they're being treated differently than everybody else. And part of that is a failure to acknowledge when someone else has done wrong. You have to. You can't just ignore it and then say, okay, but now we're going to start enforcing the law. Okay, the rules were the rules across the board, and you have to apply them across the board, regardless of where someone came from. So in my mind, it has to be B.
Kim Foxx did one of the most powerful things. First of all, she did the first mass exoneration in probably the whole state, I assume. And she apologized to those men who were wrongfully convicted. And she didn't do it. She wasn't the one who did it, but she acknowledged what had come before, and she undid it and apologized for it. So I think it's both. First, you got to acknowledge and fix the wrong stuff in the past, and also, move forward with your policies. You got to do both.
Yeah, it's a both and. I think it is. I think it actually is delegitimizing to pretend that harms weren't caused 2 days before you got there, and that there aren't people who were hurt by that, to simply say, let's move on, let's press forward. I think that's how we get that's how the system perpetuates itself, is the knowledge about the harms that have been caused in this fake attempt at reconciliation with folks who don't want to reconcile around injustice. They want to profit off of it. You have to do both.
Okay, next speed round question. I'm going to call this the Vice President Kamala Harris question. And it just goes like this. We've talked a lot about the experiences of the Kims and of other progressive Black women prosecutors. Are all Black women prosecutors being treated in this way? Or is it really about the intersection of progressive action and race and gender?
I'm gonna let you have that, Angela.
I was gonna bow to you, Kim, to go first. I have an opinion. Well, first of all Black women, whether they're conservative or not, are certainly victims of racism and sexism and misogyny, even if they're doing the wrong thing in their daily lives. But no, they're not. They didn't attacking Jackie Lacey in LA when she was, seeking the death penalty more than any other district attorney in the state of California, right? Which is why me and groups of people I work with supported George Gascon to unseat her. So yeah, being Black, we know this from the Supreme Court on down through, does not, what is the thing the young people say? All kin folks, skin folks, and what is that phrase? All skin
folk and kin folk.
That. Yeah.
That ain't a young people thing. My grandma taught me that now. Come on.
Yeah.
I think that's just a Southern thing. I don't know if y'all just getting it or what.
From Alabama. I never heard that till, a few years ago. But anyway.
I push back.
Not all of them.
I push back against the thought that you can use the word all in front of any group. I mean, because it's, you know, I mean, it's just like media. MSNBC is not the same as Fox, which is not the same as OAN. I mean, you know, I think that the
Yes,
general.
it is. Yes, it is.
the
Yes, it
general-
is. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Sorry.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
all
no.
cable news is the same. Sorry. Okay. All right. I'm done.
I don't think so, but in any case, I think that it's you know, I think there are certain systemic things that are the same probably, but I don't think you can assume that every person is treated the same. Like I said, we've seen in our own community in St. Louis, we have 2 progressive prosecutors. One of the elements that makes them different is gender. There's no question about that. But if you think that's the only thing, that's not. I mean, so it's not. I think it's important to recognize the individuality of each case.
So Ray, I'm sorry, Melissa, can I ask Ray a question to follow on what he just said? So why do you think then that Circuit Attorney Kim Gardner is getting all these attacks and Wesley Bell is not? I haven't heard about attacks on Wesley Bell. Maybe
Right. It's complicated. It's complicated. There's some issues of substance where they have performed differently, arguably. I would say that one of the biggest differences is the city of St. Louis, which is its own county, has a very different history. While St. Louis County has a lot of racism in it, and the Ethical Society of Police, who you referred to earlier, is in both now. They didn't used to be. They would tell you there's a very different layout. And part of it's gender. I mean, there's no question about it, but also part of it's style and part of it's the intensity of the problem. And when I say style, Kim Gardner, who I happen to love her for the fact that she is unapologetic, in your face and uncompromising. Wesley Bell has a different style that is less so, and it probably serves him well. I'm not saying it's better or one's right or one's wrong, but it is one of the differences. And there's no denying they have a different sort of approach to the same, and they're both very good reform prosecutors.
So really he's doing the things that Kim's doing. I didn't know that.
Well, yeah, I think so. I mean, probably not with the same intensity, I would guess, because again, you got to understand the problems in the county are not as acute as they are to say. They're as bad when they happen, but the percentages of people who are out of the community, who are, for example, unfairly imprisoned, it's a little more acute in the city, just because of the nature of the demographic differences in the city and the county. So
I don't mean to belabor this, but that's where that's where Michael Brown was killed, where Wesley Bell was.
No doubt.
That's where Michael Brown was. That's where the consent decree, and the report from the Justice Department found all these horrible, racist, explicit things happening.
Absolutely.
Where Wesley Bell is now.
Right.
So I'm gonna leave it alone, but
no, it's okay. I just think I happen to like them both. I think they're very different, and I think it's possible to be supportive of what both does. But I understand that, and it's, as I say, and gender is part of it. I mean, there's no question about that. And I don't know how to even quantify that difference, but it's real.
If I could just jump in, I know we're out of time, but I would be remiss because I do know both of them, and obviously I've known Kim longer. And I think it's the thing about when Black women do this work and we're out there as pioneers and you take the licks and the punches and the like, that the people who come thereafter, whether it's a style choice or not, knows what worked or what didn't work. And I think the battles, lines that have been drawn for, folks who've been out there. And, my pause of, style and unapologetic, look, there's an urgency to this work that we have. There's an absolute urgency around the recognition that people don't want us here, and whether they're marching on our offices or organizing recall campaigns that don't allow, sometimes particularly for Black women that I could speak of, to be as genteel as others may get to be. And then there's a benefit that others get having seen the bruises that we take, and not just in St. Louis city or county, I've seen it across the country where other progressive prosecutors have come into the fold who have taken the blueprint from what Black women prosecutors have done, and whether that is Aramis with the death penalty in Florida, and we've seen other progressive prosecutors take a similar stance after Aramis had a noose sent to her office. And it's received differently. And so my pushback, again, having known them both and think that they both are incredible public servants on behalf of the people they serve, I pretend that gender is not a piece of it. And that particularly Black women, in the way that we show up and the way that we are identified when we are unapologetic is very different than when men are unapologetic. There's a connotation that is assigned that I just would be remiss if I sat here and allowed to
well,
sit.
And when I say it, I meant it. I have the scars to show on a PBS show for 34 years. And I understand. I happen to be on the side of being unapologetic in this case. The problem women, and you know this, women, two different people that are confident. One of them is if they happen to be male, is called confident, and the other is called something like shrill or some. I mean, there's no question that it's baked into.
And Black women, right? I'm talking about Black women.
Right? Women in general.
And then,
absolutely, and then Black women's a whole nother degree of that. I've seen it with women and Black women. It's like you've hit the jackpot for being really miscast and mistreated in the media. I get that. And I'm saying that that's one of the differences between them. They're both African Americans, and there's a double standard with how they are regarded. And I'm simply saying they have different approaches to it. That's all.
I have to take a deep breath on that. And Kim, I want to appreciate you for pushing back, not on Ray per se, but on maybe pushing back is the wrong word, filling in. And I don't want to, I also don't want to let this go. I want to sit for a minute with this, because I think the intersections matter, and I don't want us to miss that the intersections matter. And I want to go back to something that you said earlier, that you went past almost quickly. And again, for folks who aren't versed in what happened with you, I just want to be clear that in addition to it being Proud Boys and white nationalists and the FOP, that there was also rape simulation. So I want folks to really understand that when we say intersection, we don't just mean race plus gender, but the ways that that in this country, right? If we go back to Roy's point about policing being about slave patrols, then please go back also to knowing that it was in fact impossible to rape a Black woman in this nation, that Black women's bodies were, as a legal matter, perceived to be open and available to anyone. And so again, Attorney Foxx has been very open about her own experience as a survivor, and the idea that the attacks come not just racist, not just ideological, but specifically sexual violence. I want us to sit with this. I want us to be uncomfortable with it. I want you to know that that whatever racist, vile, horrifying hate mail and nooses that Black men get, they don't get the messages that we get about wanting to rape us and our daughters and our mothers and, drag us. Those are unique experiences of violence, and they emerge not just from white folks, but from within the community as well. And the bearing up through that is almost indescribable. And I just want to acknowledge, Attorney Foxx, that I know that you bear up through it. And I know that you can't even talk about it in the ways that it fully needs to be talked about, but that for all of us who are survivors, including Simone Biles, who you name checked earlier, we appreciate your public survival of this continued discursive and bodily violence.
Thank you.
And know that we are coming near the end. I want to come to Professor Davis for a moment, because your work has been in the courts, and I'm wondering if you see any optimism in any part of the courts around prosecutor reform?
In the courts? No. I don't feel optimistic about the courts, right? I feel optimistic about the people. I will say this, and this is why elections matter, right? So this last election, there was so much damage done in the past 4 years to our federal courts by the appointment of incompetent people who are not even qualified to be judges on top of the positions that they hold. And unfortunately, many of them are lifetime appointments, but I'm hopeful that in this administration that there's going to be light. So when Ketanji Jackson Brown was nominated and appointed, and hopefully, God willing, she'll be on the Supreme Court. So there is a movement by this administration to nominate several Black women actually been nominated. And also a number of former public defenders, and all this is possible. So I have hope for that. Unfortunately, there's been so much damage done already. It's going to take us a while to get to where the courts are going to be our friend. But guess what? We have 3 branches of government, right? That's what this whole democracy is all about, right? And so the people still have the power to see. I tell my students all the time when I teach the constitutional criminal procedure, the Supreme Court sets the floor, not the ceiling. Just because the Supreme Court says that something, all the Supreme Court does, by the way, folks, is they decide whether or not a particular law, practice, or policy is in violation of the United States Constitution or not. So just because they say it's constitutional to use force that cops do, that doesn't mean local police departments can't on their own decide, hey, thank you, Supreme Court, but in my jurisdiction, we're not going to use excessive force. So on the local level, we can still do a lot with democracy. And that's why I feel hopeful about this movement of transformative prosecutors, or prosecutors that are trying to be transformative. We got to grow that movement, right? And that I do feel optimistic about, because I've seen the work of these incredible women that we're talking about today: Kim Foxx, Kim Gardner, Satana DeBerry, Rachel Rollins. There's so many others, Dinah Beck, and I could go on and on, who are out here doing this work. And also, because I know we're ending, I got to shout out somebody whose name hasn't been mentioned, and that's Jami Hodge, who runs the prosecution program at, and you see Kim Foxx, because there's nobody who has done more to support Black women chief prosecutors than Jami Hodge. Like, they're a thing and a sisterhood because Jami Hodge. And so thank you, Jami Hodge, for all you've done for these Black women, to support them.
I hate closing on things that feel down. I want to bring us up. And part of how we stay in struggle, and I'm sure some of you have heard me say this before, I'm the child of a man who's an intense father. I have a very intense father. He's 80, still intense. But when I was a child, he always signed our birthday cards. We always got, for our birthday, the number of dollars of however old you are. So, I mean, all the way up until like last year, I got $47 in my card, right? So however many dollars for the years that you are, and always sign the card, not love daddy, but the struggle continues, daddy. And when I was 6, I had no idea what the hell he was talking about. But as a grown woman, I so appreciate and realize that the gift wasn't the dollars. The gift was that knowledge, the struggle continues. So we're going to close out by each one of you telling our viewers, listeners right now, one organization or activist or something that they should be following, or maybe engaging, going and clicking and logging onto, something where people are in the struggle, doing it collaboratively and collectively. Or you can just give us your own URL. In other words, how do we support this work? How do we support you? Where should we be looking to gather together to do the work? And I'll start with Roy.
You know, this is hard because there are so many people doing such absolutely amazing work. I do want to shout out, you know, there's Sherry Boston out there doing this work as well. I want to shout out Aramis Ayala is now running for representative in Florida. Look, I think, you know, what the Vera Institute has been doing on race under Jami's leadership deserves unbelievable amounts of support. And I know that a lot of people are running to other organizations, but I'll just do a shout out right to the folks who invited me to do this today. And that's Jami Hodge and all of her work supporting these amazing Black women who are doing amazing things to make our country live up to its ideals.
And Professor Davis?
Already shouted out Jami and Vera. So, I mean, the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, which is doing great work around criminal justice reform, the NAACP under Damon Hewitt, formerly under Kristen Clark, who's now at DOJ, NAACP Legal Defense Fund, Sherilyn Ifill, my leader. They've done incredible work locally all the way to the Supreme Court on this issue and the voting issue, which this issue depends on people voting and being involved in democracy. And the ACLU, I have to say, is doing great work around educating people around district attorneys and why it's important that we pay attention to DA races.
Yes, and Ray?
There's a lot of great groups. I mean, National Women's Law Center is involved in this work, I think. Obviously, your organization here. I think it's a great point about voting, because that's a big part of this. And it's certainly on a local level, we've talked about groups that stand up against violence against women, because there's a lot of, obviously, very moving part of this presentation, but that is a problem everywhere in all of our communities, and it's something that people should not lose sight of.
And Attorney Foxx.
I too want to join in on the love for Jami Hodge and her commitment with Vera on this work. I want to highlight Professor Davis, who on the front lines of it is not just a brilliant professor, but seeing the work in real time with what these women were doing and taking an accelerated approach to elevate their stories and what it means, not just from the personal, but from the constitutional, and really bringing in more people into this conversation and saying we need to highlight the work of these women. And in a way where I was discouraged a couple of years ago, I have been more encouraged by forums like this that say, let's center these women. And whether that is Marilyn Mosby in Baltimore, Adina Becton, or Lanice Washington, and Satana DeBerry, I feel like I'm at an award show. I want to name every single one of them who is in our group. Shamika Collins in Mississippi. We talk about big cities, but they're in urban or rural areas as well, and where sometimes it's even harder. But the unifying of this group of women who support each other, whose names may not be on the front of big newspapers, but who are enduring, trying to change systems in offices where people aren't watching. I can't uplift them enough. And so I would say, find who your Black elected prosecutor women are, and look up their platforms and see what they're about. And if it's about bail reform or innocence work or second look work, we steal a lot from each other. You know, a lot of work that I'm doing, I've seen another sister do and give her credit for. So make sure we give them credit. But I would be remiss if I'm waiting on that article that you write about prosecutorial discretion, Professor Davis, to let me know where you're going to land, so that we can do it better. But I think I cannot say enough about how appreciative I am and my colleagues are to your elevation of not just the work of prosecutors, but Black women prosecutors. So keep following Professor Davis.
Oh, thank you, Kim. I just do whatever Jami Hodge tells me to do.
One other all shout out just to connect with what Attorney Foxx just said there about find your prosecutor, find the person who you can support. One way to do that, because the world is full of information, but one way to do that is to go to the Color of Change prosecutor database. You can put in any zip code and they will tell you who the prosecutor is and lots of information about them. So it will help you both to know who your current prosecutor is, as well as to find the folks that Attorney Foxx was just talking about. And I really hope, Attorney Foxx, that you all have like a WhatsApp or a group me or a Slack channel or something. And I hope that you all are definitely giving each other love all the time and supporting each other. So we are forever in the debt of the work that you are doing. Now, Jami, I actually see your avatar here. So I am hoping that you're going to pop in and kind of wrap the panel for us, simply because there's been so much love given to you and to the work that you've been doing at Vera Institute of Justice. And I feel like we'd like to at least say hi, show you our love as well. There she is, y'all. And so again, I know I now done called you off. You may not have your lashes on or whatever, but you look beautiful. We love you, and thank you for convening us. Thank you to all the folks today who showed up for this panel. And I'm going to turn it back over to the Vera folks, who I think are going to send all of you off into some really great breakout rooms. Thank you to Roy Austin. Thank you to Professor Davis. Thank you to
Can
Ray
I say this,
Hartmann
Melissa
and to Kim
Harris
Foxx.
Perry? Thank you, Melissa Harris Perry, for the most amazing moderation ever. Thank you.
Yes.
That's
Yes,
very kind.
yes. No, I have to, this panel, if you all could, I know you couldn't follow the chat. You can't follow all the Slacks. It has been fire. It has been chills. It has been tears. I cannot say enough about this incredible group and the skillful and amazing moderation to bring the conversation to such an important level, to highlight so much in just a brief time. Just incredibly grateful. And it is always my pleasure to be behind the warriors, because I'm not the one out front. I am not the one whose face and whose name is out there. I'm not the one getting death threats against me and my children. So it is an honor to be able to support them in any of the smallest ways possible. So just thank you all. And I am going to hand it off to Mona, who will not be as emotional as I am, and who can tell you about what's coming. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jami. Thanks to the panelists. We're all pretty much on fire here and feeling emotional from what we all just heard. So everyone, we're going to now be going into our 15-minute break. We will resume at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. When we return, Hillary Blount, who's the founder and director of For the People, is going to lead us into the workshops that you've heard referenced. So until then, take a break, enjoy some tunes on us, and we'll see you shortly. Thanks for being here.